Welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. I'm excited to welcome to the show Brad Stone, one of my favorite authors, the best-selling author of The Everything Store, and one of my new favorite reads, Amazon Unbound. Brad, welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp.
Thank you, Andrew.
It's a pleasure to have you. Brad, you and I have talked about, when I read The Everything Store, it's a nonfiction tale about Amazon and Jeff Bezos. It's all true, but it reads like a thriller. It's just one of the most fun books to read, and Amazon Unbound has not disappointed either.
Thanks. I'll take it, but I always say, Andrew, that it's probably in large part because the underlying story is so incredible, right? Bezos coming off Wall Street in the early 90s with an idea that he can build a business on the internet, and 25 years later, he's the richest guy in the world. And all sorts of zigs and zags in between. We should say he's probably one of the most controversial figures of the world right now. So the ascent hasn't been without some difficulties as well.
Brad, he sure is. He sure is controversial. He sure is interesting, as is Amazon's story. I want to dig into a bunch of stuff with you. Obviously, this show, Everybody Pulls the Tarp, is all about conversations with high performers, people in all walks of life who have amassed incredible success. I want to dig into your success as a journalist, as an author, best-selling author of multiple books. I also want to spend some time on one of your key subjects, Jeff Bezos. So let's dive right in. So where I want to start is with you, Brad, and the work that you do. When you wrote The Everything Store, how did that all start? How did you decide I'm going to write a book on Jeff Bezos and Amazon in 2013?
Really, Andrew, it was opportunism. I wanted to write a book. I had been covering Silicon Valley for more than 10 years, had finished a run at the New York Times and had come over to Bloomberg. And I was friends with a lot of authors in the tech community who had written about the big tech companies of our time, Google and Facebook and Apple. And I was sort of looking for my lane. What story could I tell? What felt fresh? And really, nobody had done a good job with the Amazon story. And that was in large part because people discounted Amazon as a tech company. They viewed it as a retailer. For a long time, it was a sort of afterthought among the big tech companies. It was up in Seattle. It was very secretive. And I had covered Amazon for the New York Times and then for Bloomberg and saw how disruptive it was being, how controversial it was in the book industry. And I thought, nobody's done the great Amazon story. So I would like to be able to say I saw it as a $1 trillion company and everything it's accomplished, but I didn't. It was simply a company that seemed to me to be poorly understood. And Bezos, was this guy with this crazy laugh and this high intellect, was worthy of further exploration. So I probably started The Everything Store in 2011, and the company back then is maybe a $40 billion market cap. Maybe 40,000 employees, a shadow of what it is today.
But still a big company.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, a big company. But I think there was a sense that maybe Bezos had selected the least interesting business model of the new age. And so when you think back to, 2008, 2009, the market cap of eBay was larger than Amazon, right? It was seen as it had none of the frictionless beauty of Google or Facebook, these purely virtual businesses. Amazon was getting into the muck of hiring people and building warehouses. Like, how horrible is that? Well, now we fast forward and we go, okay, well, those were our significant competitive moats. But back then, I think, even though it was a big company, it was seen as an unprofitable company and a company that didn't fully enjoy the benefits of the internet. And I think that was short-sighted at the time.
So The Everything Store, bestseller, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times Business Book of the Year, every accolade. It's been translated in 35 different languages. How did it come together once you decided to write the book? Were there all of these disparate, I've always wondered, were there all these little disparate stories that you had uncovered and written about that you cobbled together? Or did you set out and say, I'm going to do exhaustive research, I'm going to talk to everybody that I possibly can, and I'm going to put this together start to finish? Was it organic or piece by piece?
I think it was more of the latter. I felt like I had a sense for what the story was, but then I set out to talk to as many people as I could. I tend to outline these books repeatedly as I report them. And as I got further along into, revisiting the 90s and talking to the early Amazon executives, understanding how close the company had come to insolvency during the dot-com bust, talking to Bezos' early friends and family, figuring out that I had a lot of curiosity about his early life and trying to find his long lost biological father, if you remember that from the book. Yeah, I think, and of course, these books are a challenge to outline and to organize because so many things, of course, happen at once, right? Or at the same time. And so kind of solving the organizational challenges was very, very much a process. And it was even harder for Amazon Unbound because that covers a time span of 10 years when everything, Alexa, international expansion, grocery expansion, Bezos becoming rich and controversial is happening at the same time.
So how do you go about kind of building this network of relationships that's going to help you get the information that you need about a company that's relatively secretive at times?
Yeah, no, that is the biggest challenge. Look, I think curiosity gets you far, and familiarity gets you far. And so being able to go, and credibility. So being able to go to, current and former Amazon executives who may be concerned about talking, at least on the record, because the company can, favors secrecy and really contractually stipulates that employees, even former employees, aren't supposed to talk to the press. But, when you're curious about something and people feel they have a great story to tell, and you can convince them by virtue of your previous work that you're going to honor their story, you can get people to a yes. And I think with this latest book, Amazon Unbound, I had the advantage of the everything store. It was like a calling card. And I think people recognized that this is the history and that the history should be told. And it's not, I think the other thing, Andrew, is that I don't really come at it as a critic. And there are plenty of people who do that. And I don't come at it as a sycophant of telling a story that's uniformly positive, right? I'm trying to tell the story, the warts and all story, while also acknowledging it's one of the greatest business accomplishments of our time. So hopefully that gave at least some people comfort to talk to me. I didn't get to everybody. And, as you know now, Bezos wouldn't talk to me for the new book, in part maybe because of bad feelings left over from the first book. But I got to most people, and I was kind of happy in the end that I got to enough that I could tell a definitive story.
People have asked me when I recommend the book, the Everything Store in particular, they say, well, what side is the author on? And I always say I think he lays it out pretty well for you to make your own conclusion. I can't tell you what to think about Amazon or about Bezos, but I think Brad Stone lays it out very intently in a way that's balanced and allows you to draw your own conclusion. Was that something that you were very, very intentional about throughout? Or as you look back, you say, okay, this was fair?
You know what? It's just my training. And maybe, here I'm exposing for our audio listeners the fact that I have a lot of gray hair right now and I've been at this for a long time. But it's just the kind of journalist I am. I want to understand, and I want to give people, enough of the underlying story to be able to reach their own conclusions and not necessarily press mine onto them. Look, I'm an Amazon customer. I'm pretty upfront about that. And I don't think I would have written 2 books about the company if I didn't, at some level, admire the accomplishment and the ingenuity. At the same time, I think this latest book lays out pretty clearly how the company builds these systems and then administers them with software and then tries to fix the unintended consequences and the shortcomings later in very much the same way that other tech companies do. And that has had profound societal consequences. So it's not black or white, it's gray. I think the story is by nature gray, as with so many things in our world. And so I'm just trying to be kind of honest about the story. And there are books out there about Amazon and about other companies that are really trying to make a case. And I love it when the critics come out, read the book, and come out with ammo. And when the companies and the former executives, read the book and say, this was a faithful retelling. I want both sides to get something out of it.
So how does it work when you're going through this process and any creative, any writer, any journalist, when you kind of run into a wall, you can't piece together a part of the puzzle or the equation. What do you do?
I acknowledge the ambiguity, and try to be transparent about either the shortcomings of the reporting or the fact that, you know what, on this issue, and there are some good examples, and maybe one will occur to me, but where there are some pretty good examples in Amazon Unbound where Bezos changes course. He declares in 2017 that the retail division of Amazon should strip out the impact of advertising and get profitable on its own, and that occasions layoffs and all sorts of friction within the company and with its relationships with partners. And ultimately, even senior executives at Amazon were like, we don't know what Jeff was thinking. Could it have been that he wanted to free up the cash to go invest in Hollywood and pursue his dreams of making Amazon a stalwart of the new streaming landscape? Or could it have been that he was simply impatient with some of his senior executives on that division? And I didn't know. And Bezos, even if I had gotten to him, probably wouldn't have told me. And so in those cases, you kind of have to just acknowledge the ambiguity and then move on.
What are, this show is called Everybody Pulls the Tarp. It's all about these moments that Olympic athletes, professional athletes, elite coaches, best-selling authors, media personalities, CEOs have, where they have to do some things that are maybe outside of the job description, not so glamorous, but have a huge impact on success. When you think about your career as a journalist, as an author of these books, what are some of the tarp pulling moments for you? The things that maybe are less glamorous that people say, oh, Brad Stone, great author. He's got all these best-selling books in 35 different languages. It must be easy. What are some of the moments for you where you say, hey, this isn't so glamorous?
Well, I mean, telling a story, first of all, Amazon's a very decentralized company, which means that innovation, even though Bezos is kind of the innovator in chief and the main character, there's no one person where you can get the kind of detail that you would need to create these narratives. And Bezos is secretive and he rarely gives interviews. So it's really a function of going out to hundreds of people. In this book, everyone from Alexa to the employees who developed Prime Day, who worked on the white label products like the single cow burger, who were there when Bezos took ownership of the Washington Post and was developing a space company, and there in his fight with the National Enquirer, the vastness of the source pool equals the vastness of his empire. And so I literally had to go over the course of 3 years and not only talk to hundreds of people, get hundreds of people to talk to me. And I'm someone who likes to sit down with somebody over a coffee or a meal and to get to know them. And so just the amount of footwork that was needed to get enough of the story to create a colorful patchwork that would be a satisfying narrative. There's elements of that were highly glamorous. And I think it's only because I'm so interested in this story and how they did it and what it means for our society that a company like Amazon can exert so much control that, to me, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like working on a mystery and one that I really got consumed with.
Well, it reads like a mystery. It reads like a thriller, like I've told you, even though it's nonfiction. And your curiosity comes through, and having those coffees, having those meals, building those relationships clearly has been a factor in your success. So now I'm envisioning you traversing the globe, having all these coffee and lunch meetings. What does your note-taking system look like? I mean, do you just have notebooks all over the place? Do you have this endless Google Doc where you're cycling through? What are your systems to pull all this together?
It's pretty disorganized, I have to say. I do have some notebooks, but I tend to then transcribe them afterwards. So essentially, it's Word files and a cloud storage system and different files for every interview. And try to organize things by chapters, and then successive documents for outlines and drafts, and finally combining all the chapters into a mega draft. So I don't know, that's not all that sexy, but I'm someone, I guess, because I grew up with PCs, I type much faster than I write, and I've never developed a good shorthand. So I'm best when I'm sitting in front of somebody, looking at them, but typing notes onto a laptop.
It's very interesting. See, I started my career in audit at one of the big four accounting firms. And at that point, a lot of people were starting to take laptops to meetings and take notes. And the training was, you're in the audit business. If you bring a laptop, you're likely to get less accurate or maybe less thorough information, right? It just makes people who you're sitting with uneasy. That's obviously evolved over the years, but I've got this really archaic note-taking style. So like when I read your books, I highlight and underline things that I find interesting, and then I actually put them in a notebook or index cards, and then I kind of categorize them by topics if I want to go back and create some content around different things. Everybody has their own way of doing it, and you can Google like note-taking and how to organize yourself, and there's a million articles that come up, but it's personal. It really comes down to what works for you. The other thing I want to ask about, Brad, is the others involved. I know your name is on the book, but how do you engage others in the process? Do you have folks that kind of peer review? Do you how does that work? Who else is involved in the process?
Sure. I'm fortunate enough to work at a great news organization, Bloomberg News, and I work with a team of 65 journalists around the world covering tech, and we've got a couple of great Amazon reporters here at Bloomberg who I work with. So first off, I just have to give credit to Spencer Soper and Matt Day, who I work with at Bloomberg, because they're Amazon, they're Bezos-ologists also, like me, and so they're just a reservoir of good cheer and sort of people to bounce thoughts off of, and great supporters. But generally had a great editor at Simon & Schuster, Stephanie Frerich, and I worked with. I had a reporting assistant, Lindsay Gelman, who I set off on some discrete tasks and asked her to help me crack, for example, the Alexa identity question. Who is the voice of Alexa? And we did that one together. And then I hired some fact checkers that helped me save me from myself during the editing process. And that's it. But you know what? In the end, Andrew, it's a little bit of a lonely process, right? Nobody can churn out the words for you. You got to sit there and day after day, or in my case, it was morning after morning, just getting it all down in paper and making sure it was coherent.
Success is often a lonely process. So many successful people who I talk to say, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success, or something to that effect. You said the word. I want to make sure I got it right. Bezos-ologist. How did you characterize that?
Yeah, I joke that I'm a Bezos-ologist, right? Because the science of this man, and he is so complicated, and he's an inventor, which he was how he likes to see himself. But he's also a creator of systems, of business systems, and he's had a real impact on employment in the U.S. And on competition. And so, and of course, and then in his private enterprises space and his newspaper, it really is. It's a half joke that this is a scientific discipline unto itself.
It is. Let's get into the man that you spent a lot of time studying, Jeff Bezos and Amazon a little bit, because I think there's a lot to dig into there. One of the things that's been remarkably consistent, no matter who I talk to, whether it's an Olympic athlete, an elite coach, a CEO, is the concept of failure as a key ingredient to success. And one of the things, as I read the Everything Store and Amazon Unbound and other information about Jeff Bezos over the years, is just how either vulnerable he is, willing to fail, and how much failure is almost part of their DNA. Talk about that for a minute. I mean, how has failure played a role in some of Amazon's biggest successes?
It definitely has. There have been different kinds of failures. The initial failures to create an auction system for third-party sellers, and then to create a store system for third-party sellers, and then because of those failures, they strike upon the Amazon marketplace. So failures have been instructive and iterative, leading to a success. Failures have been full-fledged belly flops, like the Fire Phone that Bezos personally launched in 2014. And then ignominiously pulled from the market a couple months later because nobody was buying them. And I think you're right in that Bezos, he's woven that into the mythology of Amazon and talked about how you can't really invent unless you try things and are willing to fail. I also think you put your finger on something, a kind of tolerance for public embarrassment doesn't seem to bother him. And the example that comes to mind is when he called out the National Enquirer for extorting him over his personal photographs and said, he's willing to suffer that embarrassment, but he thought it was wrong. And he called out the paper, and he ended up getting the editor of the paper fired. And he kind of won that battle, despite the fact that he had conducted himself in such a way as to sort of open himself up for embarrassment. So I think there's a constitutional tolerance for failure at the company that's allowed it to be innovative. And then there's something about him that he doesn't appear to care all that much unless it has a business impact about how the world sees him. And clearly, right, I mean, the world's not viewing him all that favorably these days, in part because of his extraordinary wealth. And I'm not sure he cares that much about that.
So what's interesting there is I think when you get back to like the vulnerability, the fact that he doesn't care, is it like, does it come from like a place of fearlessness? Does it come from a place of complete egomania? Like what do you think makes him as a leader just not care what other people think, unless there's a downstream, enterprise value impact, I guess you could say?
Right. I mean, obviously he is receptive to criticism. He's talking about turning Amazon into the world's most employee-friendly company now, which wouldn't have happened if Amazon hadn't been pummeled over the course of 10 years about its relationship with employees. I do think that there's some point at which he listens to criticism and he adjusts. The $15 an hour wage in the fulfillment centers was in response to a drumbeat of activism from unions and senators like Bernie Sanders, and they respond, but it's tactical. And then there's this sort of personal, maybe, tolerance for embarrassment that I think is more about kind of conviction, right? Bezos firmly, he believes in what he's doing with space. He thinks this is going to be hugely impactful for the future of humanity. He's a technologist. He's a futurist. He's got utter conviction that voice will be the way we interact with computers. And if people want to wring their hands about privacy or the wastefulness of going to space or, why billionaires shouldn't exist, I just don't get the sense that he spends a lot of time thinking about that. His eyes are firmly planted on going to space or developing Alexa. And I think it stems from confidence, I guess, in his beliefs.
What do you think? Obviously, like when people think about him and his his body of work to this point, and what kind of leader is Jeff Bezos? I mean, there's a lot of positives, and there's also a lot of controversy and criticism. What do you think are his biggest challenges inherently as a leader?
Well, I'll answer that, but I'm also interested in what you think, Andrew, because sometimes I think I'm a little too close to it because I'm sort of reading and plugged into everything, all the commentary about Amazon. So I don't know if my views represent the kind of like more media, sphere feeling about Amazon Bezos. My feeling is that his image has never been as bad as it is now, that he's, viewed as the embodiment of income inequality, and as a monopolist, and as an employer, an unempathetic employer that is, has architected a system that is intentionally difficult towards employees. I think, some of that's overstated. It all has an element of truth to it. But despite the fact that he's about to resign as probably the single most successful entrepreneur in our lifetimes, it feels like the accomplishment is sort of overlooked, and he's being hammered on all fronts. But I don't know. You tell me. Like, do you feel like I'm overstating that because I'm like maybe I'm a little bit too plugged into the mainstream media criticism right now?
No. I mean, I spend a lot of time, studying leaders and successful people, and I think one of the biggest challenges I've always had reconciling with Jeff Bezos' success is just the perceived lack of empathy. and I think you mentioned that word there, the perceived lack of empathy, the lack of feel, and importance of relationships and things like that. Those things have kind of left me always with a sour taste. But yet, I continue, pushing that add to cart in my Amazon app, and probably since we've started talking, there's been 3 deliveries of Amazon products. But I always think about him, through the lens of, there's just no empathy there. There's just no, connectivity. There's no ability to kind of understand, what others are going through. And I feel like that's always part of his legacy. But on the flip side, when you think about work ethic and focus and energy towards something that you believe in, there are very few who've probably applied themselves in a more directed fashion than he has over the last, some odd years to bring some of this to life. So I just think it's very complicated, but it's very hard for me in this day and age to wrap my mind around someone and say that person's an exceptional leader if they completely lack empathy.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't know that he completely lacks it. I think, but like the testimony is in, and it's repetitive, and the argument against him from the fulfillment centers and the transportation network is that he's been transactional, right? And he's used people up and moved on and created systems that push people to the very limit, often without regards for their humanity.
There are so many principles, though, that you can take, right? Like, I think we become like this over-meetinged culture, right? And you think back to some of Bezos's most simple concepts, the 2 pizza team, that we shouldn't have any extra people around a table, that we can't feed. We should never have a meeting that's larger than we can feed with two pizzas, things like that. I mean, those things make sense. I think as you think about focus, and I've talked many times about the fact that he essentially brings people into meetings and says, okay, we're going to spend the first 10 minutes reading, and you're going to have to do all this legwork up front. I mean, he's got a system that enables this incredible efficiency, this incredible creativity. But, there's also there are also challenges. What do you think, before we wrap up, Brad, where do you think things are headed? Like, we're very close to his official, date that he's stepping down. He's going to move on to different things, but remain as chairman. Andy Jassy is going to take over as CEO. Where does Amazon go from here in terms of leadership?
Right. It's interesting. I mean, when I was finishing the book and he announced his resignation, I had a moment of panic. Like, do I need to rewrite this thing? But then I realized that actually the story of him drifting away from Amazon was the story I was telling in the book. That over the years, even as he's sort of managed new initiatives like Alexa, he allowed deputies to really run the older businesses like Andy Jassy and AWS. So I think at the beginning, not much changes. Bezos says he's going to continue to nurture new projects. Jassy will run the whole thing. He'll be the guy sitting in the congressional hearing seat, presenting probably a more humbler face to critics and regulators. But Bezos will still be the loudest voice in the room. I actually think, though, that this is a process, and he'll continue to drift away to philanthropy, to space, everything he's doing with Blue Origin, and to just kind of live in a life of luxury with Lauren Sanchez and their new grand sailing yacht that I wrote about in the book. And then maybe things do change with Amazon. And look, maybe there'll be some good things and some bad things. I think Jassy is a more empathetic leader. I think he could probably be more credible in redefining Amazon's relationship with its warehouse employees. On the other hand, I tell a lot of stories in the book about efforts like Prime Day that wouldn't have happened without Bezos's maniacal attention, his push, and the magic of the founder, the inspiration and intimidation that he can bring to employees at Amazon. And I don't necessarily know that Jassy will have that. So, the question, it might be a more empathetic place. And the question is, will it continue to be an innovative place? And Jassy will have to prove himself in the same way that Tim Cook did at Apple.
Well, I think the jury is still out and will be out for a long time on Amazon and Jeff Bezos as a leader. There is no question, Brad, though, about you. You are a tarp puller. Amazing work to date. I can't wait to see what you continue to do in your career. I want to flash it up here one more time and say it for the listeners. Amazon Unbound. If you haven't read it, go get it. on Amazon or wherever books are sold. And if you haven't checked out the Everything Store, you got to check that out too. Brad, thank you for pulling the tarp. Thank you for traversing the globe to have coffee and lunch and dinner with all those people to accumulate this information to better educate all of us on one of the great global business stories of our time. And thank you for pulling the tarp. Great to see you, Brad.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Take care.